Falling on my knees in worship, giving all I am to seek your face. So all I am is yours. My whole life I place in your hands. Your mercy, humbled, I bow down in your presence at your throne. I call and you answer, and you came to my rescue, and I wanna be where you are. I call and you answer, and you came to my rescue, and I wanna be where you are. My life be lifted high, and our world be lifted high, and our life be lifted high, high, my life be lifted high, and our world be lifted high, and our life be lifted high. I call and you answer, and you came to my rescue, and I wanna be where you are. Yes, I call and you answer, and you came to my rescue, and I wanna be where you are. My life be lifted high, and our world be lifted high, and our love be lifted high, high and high. My life be lifted high, and our world be lifted high, and our love be lifted high. Falling on my knees in worship, giving all I am to see your face. So all I am is yours. My whole life I place in your hands. Your mercy, humble, I bow down in your presence at your throne. I call and you answer, and you came to my rescue, and I wanna be where you are. I call and you answer, and you came to my rescue, and I wanna be where you are. In my life, be lifted high, our world, be lifted high in our love, be lifted high, high in our love. My life, be lifted high, our world, be lifted high in our love, be lifted high, high. Falling on my knees in worship, giving all I am to see your face. So all I am is yours. All I am is yours.
Hear, O Yisrael, Yahuwah our Elohim. Yahuwah is one. And you shall love Yahuwah your Elohim with all your heart, and with all your being, and with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall impress them upon your children, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up, and shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Hallelujah. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Glad everybody made it. All right. So this is a very exciting week. Probably most of you have by now figured out that this week of appointed times here, these observances that we're going through are happening exactly like they did in real time when Yahushua was going through them back in the year 4000, Earth timeline. And so what I mean by that is he was staked on the fourth day. And then now we're in the countdown. We're in unleavened bread. We've went through Passover, the Last Supper and Passover, and the first day of unleavened bread. is now behind us, and we are counting down through the 7 days of unleavened bread. And so at this particular time, then, Yahuwah is still in the tomb. So I think what I'd kind of like to study with you all today or this evening is maybe perhaps the most overlooked part of the Passover, if you will, or Feast of Unleavened Bread, and that's first fruits. So I'd like to study a little bit about first fruits, bring up some highlights about it, and maybe distinguish between the resurrection and being woke up from your sleep. So Bikurim happens on the morrow after the weekly Shabbat during the week of unleavened bread. So there's some teachings out there that say that Yahusha died on the 6th day and somehow was resurrected on the 1st day, and somehow that completes 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb. Well, we know it does not. So this is all part of Satan's deception or counterfeit, if you will, in which they have named Easter after the Earth Mother. And they claim that, I guess the notion of it all is that Yahusha, as far as I can figure out anyway, I might be wrong on this, but it's their tradition, not mine. But apparently Yahusha was resurrected and ascended, and then he came back instead of coming back as a Ruach HaKodesh, he came back as a bunny rabbit carrying a basket of eggs. So I don't know how they come up with that. I can't find that in Scripture. It may be in there, but I sure can't find it. There's only one translation that even mentions Easter, and that's the King Jimmy, the KJV. Ain't found anywhere else. So it's kind of fishy, to say the least. But we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on Satan's deception or his counterfeit observance. I'd rather spend our time on Yahusha. And so I'm just glad to be with you all again. It's been a fast week, and we're moving right along here with these observances. So where we first learn about this first fruits, or the wave sheaf offering, or the barley harvest, if you will, the sacrificing or offering of the first fruits of the harvest. Nobody was allowed to eat any of the harvest or take from it or do anything until Yahuwah got his choice pick offering of the first fruits and the best of the fruits, the best of it. And then after the wavering and the observance, then everybody was allowed to go ahead and harvest and go ahead and take their fair share of the harvest. So we read about that in Leviticus 23, of course. Everybody should know that. And we'll read a little bit about it. And then I want to get deep into it and talk more about what's really happening there. Okay, so like I said, some people teach that Yahusha was not the first to resurrect. He was not the firstborn of the resurrection. They claim other people were raised from the dead prior to Yahusha's resurrection, such as Lazarus or Alazar, and a boy and a girl. And the way that they explain this in their teaching is that these people were resurrected from the dead before Yahusha, but Yahusha was the firstborn of the resurrection because he was the first one that was accepted into the family of Yahuwah, we'll just say. All right, so that's how they have a differential between the Yahusha's resurrection and the other people's resurrection. I have a different opinion of that, and we'll get into that here in a little while. And about the middle of this, we'll talk more about that. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so before we get started here, let me just say hello to a few people. Peggy Russell, glad you're here, sister. John, glad you're here, brother. Phil, glad you're here, brother. Kinsley, glad you're here, sister. Yami, glad you're here, sister. Raul, glad you're here, brother. Ronald, glad you're here, brother. Sandra, glad you're here, sister. Earl, glad you're here, brother. Lou, glad you're here, brother. Phyllis, glad you're here, sister. Cato, glad you're here, brother. Tad, glad you're here, brother. Valerie, glad you're here, sister. Chad, glad you're here, brother. Kathleen, glad you're here, sister. Lateran, glad you're here, sister. And there we go. All right. So we'll no doubt have others trickling in here as we get started. And the first thing I'd like to do is, we may have time to open this up at the end, but I'm not real sure because there's a lot of reading here. But first thing I like to do is go directly to Leviticus 23 and see what Yahuwah says. Glad you're here, William. Glad you're here, brother William. And then we'll get deeper into the wave sheaf offering and what it really is all about. Unfortunately, it's really overlooked quite a bit. It's in the shadow of the Passover and unleavened bread and everything, but it's a very vital, maybe even the most important part of the whole Passat observance, really. And so I refer to it as the resurrection, and because I believe that's what it is all about precisely, really. Okay, and without the resurrection, what kind of hope do we have? What are we doing if it's not for the hope of the resurrection, the expectation of immortality for our works? And so I believe it to be vitally important, appointed time, and perhaps, in my opinion, maybe the most important, besides his second coming, maybe. Okay, which has not happened yet. The first four have happened. They are fulfilled predictions or fulfilled prophecy, if you will. Are we still supposed to observe them? Absolutely, as a memorial? Yes. In other words, we're supposed to remember what Yahusha did and do it in remembrance of him. Okay, and definitely his death, burial, resurrection, ascension, and return as a Ruach HaKodesh to fill us and to give us life is nothing to take lightly. Of course, we need to remember what he did and observe it. Okay, so here we go into Leviticus 23 then. It starts around verse 9. Leviticus 23, verse 9, talks about the first fruits or the barley harvest, if you will, which is coming up the day after this week's Shabbat. So we haven't come to that yet, but we're going to. And Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Yisrael, and you shall say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. Now, this is speaking of the barley harvest. And he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah for your acceptance. So there would be, they would take and they would cut some barley, and then they would have a good plant of the barley in their hand, and then they would take this and give it to the priest. Best looking plants they could see in the field. On the morrow after the Shabbat, okay, so then did they cut the barley on the Shabbat? Yes, they absolutely did. Hi, Mom, glad you're here. Yes, they did. So they took their sickle and they cut up the best looking barley plants they could find and give to the priest, to Yahuwah, on the Sabbath. Ooh, everybody's freaking out, right? All right, so on the morrow after the Shabbat, the priest waves it. Okay. I could get into that a little bit deeper, but at this particular time, I'm not going to. I might later on. It's not that big of a deal. And on that yom, when you wave the sheaf, you shall prepare a male lamb. Okay, so these burnt offerings and stuff and meal offerings and so forth and so on, most of them have been eliminated because there's no temple to do them. The temple was required to perform these by the priests. So since there's no temple and the priesthood is not really there anymore either, although they are trying to revive it, this is why they don't do these offerings, okay, that you're going to read about. The ones that they're doing over there are not being done exactly according to Yahuwah's word, because there's no temple. Okay, so, and on that yom, when you wave the sheaf, you shall prepare a male lamb a year old. This ain't the Passover now. This is talking about first fruit, Bikurim. All right, the day after the weekly Shabbat that falls in the week of unleavened bread. A perfect one as a burnt offering to Yahuwah, and its grain offering, 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. A sweet fragrance, and its drink offering, 1/4 of a hin of wine. And you do not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain until the same yom that you have brought an offering to your Elohim. A law forever throughout your generations and all your dwelling. See, so they weren't allowed to eat any of that stuff until it was offered to Yahuwah first. Then they could on the same day, on Bikurim. Okay? All right, so here now, that's pretty much all Yahuwah really has to say about this appointed time. It's not a high Shabbat or a high one, but it has a very important, distinct role, okay? And that is it's eternally connected, if you will, to Shavuot or Pentecost. Okay, so it continues to say here then in verse 15, and from the morrow after the Shabbat. This would be the weekly Shabbat now. From the yom that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall count for yourself 7 complete Sabbaths or Shabbats until the morrow after the 7th Shabbat. You count 50 yamim, then you shall bring a new grain offering to Yahuwah. And this would be on Shavuot, and this would be a grain offering, would be a wheat offering. Now, the harvest would be wheat. Okay, so 7 times 7 is 49 plus 1 day is 50. And that's what Pentecost means in the Greek. It means count 50. All right, so there's a lot of teaching out there that tries to say otherwise. And they're, as far as, in my opinion, they're wrong. Okay, I think it's fairly clear here from what Yahuwah tells us to do. So fruits is, first fruits is connected to Shavuot in this way. Okay, that we, from the morrow after the Shabbat, the weekly Shabbat, from that day, which will be the first day of the week, that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, which is the first day of the week. So first fruits always falls on the first day of the week, always. You shall count for yourselves 7 complete Sabbaths or 7 weeks. 7 times 7 be 49 days plus 1 until the day after, the morrow after the 7th Shabbat. You count that day would be 50. So you count 50 days. Then you bring a new grain offering to Yahuwah, which would be a wheat offering. All right. And you'll hear a lot of different teachings about this and how you count, but without identifying Bikurim, okay, the day after the weekly Shabbat in the week of unleavened bread, your count may not be accurate because this is the specifics that Yahuwah has given us on how to count. We just read it for ourselves. Okay, so the moral of the story is read it yourself. All the 7 appointed times are in scriptures. There's nothing, no secrets here. But once you find out that it's in, that all this is actually in the scriptures, what you may find is a lot of people adding stuff. So all the things that people are adding to what Yahuwah has said are a den of adders. Okay, and you don't have to do them because Yahuwah didn't tell you to do them. Men did. And so what are they? They're their traditions. So anything that's not written down in the word of truth it would be properly labeled a tradition. And then you decide for yourself whether or not you want to carry out men's traditions or not, or just stay specific, minimal to what Yahuwah has told us to do, precisely and exactly what Yahuwah says. And that's how you conduct your appointed times. Up to you, really. But if it's not written here, you can categorize it as tradition. It's been added. If it is written in here, then it hasn't been added. It's the word of Yahuwah, and you need to do it precisely what he said. All right? Okay. So I think then that gives us a really good idea what's required of us on that observance, particular observance called first fruits or Bikurim. So from there, when you say, okay, so this is kind of cool, but what does it all mean? Why were they required to do all that? So, as I had said before, almost everything in the Tanakh is a type. It's a foreshadow of a reality that's coming. And it's practice, it's rehearsal of something that's coming. So again, it's up to you, but Yahushua has fulfilled the first four. Do we need to rehearse them in anticipation of Yahuwah coming and fulfilling them? No, they've already been fulfilled. So it's up to you. Do what you think you should do. Study for yourself and decide. Let the Ruach HaKodesh lead you. But the last three, the ones that have not been fulfilled, coming in the fall of the year, as we know it, have not been fulfilled. And so they're still mikra. They're still waiting to be fulfilled. And so we should rehearse them and practice for the day that they are fulfilled by Yahushua, so that we know what's going on and we're not taken by surprise like the Gentiles will be. Okay, or the nations. All right. So with all that said, let's get into this a little deeper here now. The wave sheaf offering. Yahuwah restored several major truths through the awakening of the last Nazarene. One of them was his secret prophecies throughout the Tanakh, and especially in his creation week. Another one that he's awakened in the last Nazarene to and restored is the understanding of the observance and types of Yahuwah's appointed times, which is widely called festivals. Now, there's only 3 festivals. Okay, all 7 of them are not festivals. There's only 3. And they are defined in scriptures fairly easily to understand them. And they're found in Deuteronomy 16. Specifically, that specifically speaks of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. There's only 3. I know some say there's 4, some say they're all, but they're not. It's, again, what's Yahuwah say? Well, in Deuteronomy 16, he says there's 3. Okay, and so read it yourself. If we look at 8 and 9, it says, Yamam, 6 Yamam you eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th Yam there's a closing festival to Yahuwah your Elohim. You do no work. Count 7 weeks for yourself. Begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. See that? So the sickle to the grain, well, this is talking about procurement. Well, we just talked about it. They'd go out on Shabbat, at the closing of Shabbat, toward the evening, and they would get the best looking barley plants they could find. They take a sickle and they chop them down, and they would take a handful and present them to the priest. Begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. So as soon as it got dark and they handed that to the priest, guess what day it was the first day. The priest would prepare the barley for the wave offering, which would usually happen around the 3rd hour, which would be about 9 o'clock in the morning, our time. All right. So if you read Deuteronomy 16, you should have no problem coming to the conclusion that there's only 3 pilgrimage feasts or festivals. Okay. Look at 16. That's a good one, easy one to remember. 3 times a year, all your males appear before Yahuwah your Elohim in the place which he chooses, at the festival of unleavened bread, and the festival of weeks, and the festival of booths. There's 3. He names no more. Yahuwah names no more. There you go. Very simple. Remember Deuteronomy 16:16, correct? Should be. So anyways, let's continue on here. The wave sheaf offering. So Yahuwah restored these several truths that we just spoke about. And the observance and the types of Yahuwah's festivals that are commanded in Deuteronomy 16 and Leviticus 23, as far as that goes. The world without the revealed understanding of the appointed times had little idea what Yahuwah is working out on this earth for a redemption plan. We now know. But after careful study and observation of these days, we find that within the annual appointed time cycle, it's a yearly cycle, an annual occurrence, Yahuwah unveils his awesome plan of redemption for all mankind. To summarize these appointed times, the Passover reminds us of Mashiach's blood sacrifice and when he took our sins upon himself. As far as literal goes, it can remind us of him delivering them from Mitzrayim, okay, from Egypt. But this is not what I'm trying to talk about now. I'm trying to get up to date here with this stuff. Unleavened bread, which represents Yahushua's fleshly death, is a reminder of our lifelong task of removing sin from our life. So the matzah is flat, it's pierced, it's bruised. It represents his death of his fleshly body that was sinless. A sinless man laid lifeless. Okay, Pentecost memorializes the giving of the Ruach HaKodesh, or the giving of the 10 Commandments at Sinai. But I'm trying to bring us up to speed here, catching up with Yahuwah now. It's the giving of the Ruach HaKodesh, and looks forward to the reaping of the first fruits of Yahuwah's family. The day of trumpet signifies the second coming of Yahushua and the first resurrection of the Kadesh ones and those who remain alive in Mashiach with them. The Day of Atonement proclaims access to Yahuwah's throne being opened and our sins being completely removed by Yahushua's sin offering, while the Feast of Tabernacles is a foreshadow of his coming 1,000-year reign on earth. Finally, the 8th day of Tabernacles, which is a high Shabbat or a high one, or the last great day, or the grand finale of all the feasts, represents the great white throne judgment period when all mankind will either be given an immortal body or thrown into the lake of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of the teeth, folks. However, for some reason, very few people realize that Yahushua fulfilled another appointed time or festival upon being resurrected. This festival, in which a priest waved a sheaf of the first fruits of Yisrael's barley harvest before Yahuwah, was held each year on the day after the weekly Shabbat during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Thus, a priest would have conducted this wave sheaf observance during the daytime hours after the Mashiach's resurrection, which would have been about 9 a.m. our time. During this period, according to the Mishnah, the sheaf to be waved in the ceremony was reaped from the field as the Shabbat ended and Sunday began, or the first day began. It says on the Shabbat, the barley was reaped. On the Shabbat, the priest says to them, "Shall I reap on this Shabbat?" They shall say, yes. Okay, so this was taken out of Jacob Neusner, the Mishnah, a new translation, Manahoth, on page 753 to 754, if you want to look it up. So at dusk, at the end of the Shabbat, the priest put the sickle to the grain. Read Deuteronomy 16:9. We just did. Just do it again, just in case you missed it. Go to Deuteronomy 16:9. It says, count 7 weeks for yourself. Begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. There it is. It backs it up. It's history, man. So when was the sheaf waved? Well, written histories of the time show that it was waved about the same time as the daily morning sacrifice. That is about the 3rd hour and or 9 a.m. on the first day of the week, or the sun's day, if you will. The reaping and the waving of the sheaf symbolized Yisrael giving the first fruits and the best of the harvest to Yahuah first, and its subsequent acceptance by him. It is this exact type that Yahushua fulfilled. As the weekly Shabbat was ending exactly 72 hours from his burial, Yahuwah resurrected Yahushua from the dead. Yahuwah reaped the first and best of his spiritual harvest precisely on time. Yet even so, you can read 1 Corinthians 15:23 if you want confirmation on that. Yet even so, Yahushua had not fulfilled the entire prediction. Notice John 20:17. So let's go to John 20:17. Here, everybody. I'm in BYNV. If you got a BYNV, go to John 20:17. And it says, Yahushua said to her, do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my Elohim and your Elohim. So there it is. So Yahushua had not fulfilled the entire prediction. He only fulfilled it partially at that particular point. Where he appeared to Mary. Also, let me pause here for a second and bring up the robber that was on the stake next to Yahushua, where Yahushua told him, he said, remember me when you come to your kingdom. And Yahushua said, this day, I tell you, you will be with me in paradise. Okay, so the uninformed teachers like to use this passage as proof that there's a place called heaven, that we're instantly judged upon death and we either go to heaven or hell. But obviously here, then it can't mean what they say it means, because if Yahushua is in his tomb for 3 days and 3 nights, and then he come out and he told Mary, don't touch me because I have not ascended to my Father yet, then that's pretty much proof that robber ain't go anywhere that day. So it can't be this day, I tell you, you'll be with me in paradise. Otherwise, Yahushua lied to that robber. Because Yahushua himself just said, I have not ascended to my Father, don't touch me. And it's been 3 days and 3 nights at this point. And when he appeared to Mary, it was the 4th day. So that'd be a double whammy. So it doesn't mean what they tell you that means. The reason they tell you all that, because it helps support their tradition and Satan's counterfeit tradition of Easter that replaces Yahuwah's appointed times and the resurrection of the Master. Satan's behind that lie. Satan's behind all the lies. He's the father of lies. That's why I'm wearing this shirt. Truth over tradition. You see it? Truth over tradition. So we want the truth over Satan's counterfeit lies, which is men's traditions. They have bought into Satan's lies, hook, line, and sinker. And they get out there and roll Easter eggs around with their nose and pretend like it has something to do with the resurrection of the Master. Why? Because it attracts the children. If they can brainwash the children at an early age, they can grow up and continue to spread Satan's counterfeit lie. I can promise you, folks, and I ain't got no reservation in this. Yahushua ascended. Well, he didn't come back as an Easter bunny, as some kind of bunny with a basket full of chicken eggs. He came back as the comforter, the Ruach HaKodesh, which indwells his believers, his people, his chosen. That's what he came back as, not no bunny, rabbit, going out peddling chicken eggs to the innocent, the children. You got to be kidding me. Better that you have a millstone hung around your neck and throw it out into the sea than to deceive the innocent. I'm just warning you. Do what you want. It's your choice. You got a free choice. You can choose. Choose truth over tradition is my recommendation to you. All right. In other words, as the first to be resurrected from the dead, or first fruits of Yahuwah's family, Yahushua had not yet appeared before the Father for acceptance as our Redeemer, Deliverer, and High Priest, meaning he had not yet been waived. The context of John 20 shows that it was still early in the morning, and most likely shortly after Mary returned to the disciples. Yahushua then ascended to the Father's throne and to the set-apart place in the Shemayim to be waived and or accepted as our Redeemer. And perhaps at the exact time, the priests waved the barley sheaf offering before Elohim in the set-apart temple on earth. It happened at the same time in the Shemayim and on the earth. Perhaps. I like to lean toward it did. Yahuwah always fulfills his word precisely. So what did Yahushua do when Mary took off like a jackrabbit to go tell the brother, to take the message to Yahuwah's brothers that he told him to take it to? What did Yahushua do when he ascended on high to be the sheaf offering, to be waved in front of Yahuwah? What did he do? Well, it tells us in Hebrews what he did. So let's go to Hebrews 9. Hebrews 9, 11. 9:11. We'll start at 9:11. We'll go through it. There's no big rush here. But Mashiach, having become a high priest of the coming good things through the greater and more perfect tent not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, entered into the most set-apart place once for all, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood, having obtained everlasting redemption. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of the heifer, sprinkling the defiled, sets apart for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of the Mashiach, who through the everlasting Ruach offered himself unblemished to Yahuwah, so he went out and offered himself to Yahuwah, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living Yahuwah? And because of this, he is the mediator of a renewed covenant, so that death having taken place for redemption of the transgressions under the first covenant, those who are called might receive the promise of the everlasting inheritance. For where a covenant is, it's necessary for the death of the covenant one to be established. For the covenant over those dead is firm, since it is never valid while the covenant one is living. So he had to die in order to get, annul or the first covenant in order to reestablish the renewed covenant, which is basically the same, but he's just doing it in a better way. Therefore, with his blood. Therefore, not even the first was instituted without blood. For when, according to the Torah, every command had been spoken by Moshe to all the people, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant which Yahuwah commanded you." And in the same way, he sprinkled with blood both the tent and all the vessels of the service. And according to the Torah, almost all is cleaned with blood, and without shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. So it was necessary then that the copies of the heavenly ones should be cleansed with these, but the heavenly ones themselves with better slaughter offerings than these. So the heavenly ones had to be sprinkled with the blood of Yahusha. Animal blood wasn't going to get it. For Mashiach had not entered into a Kadesh place made by hands. He didn't enter the one made on the earth. Figures of the true. So they were shadows of the true, because the ones on the earth were made precisely to resemble the ones in the Shemayim. They were just copies of what was in the Shemayim showed Moses on top of Mount Sinai. Figures of the true, but into the heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of Yahuwah on our behalf. So that's what he did. He went and appeared in front of Yahuwah's throne, on our behalf. That's where he went, while Mary was running like a jackrabbit to find the brethren. Not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters into the set-apart place year by year, with blood not his own, that blood that didn't work. For if so, he would have had to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the offering of himself. And as it awaits men to die once, and after this, the judgment. So also the Mashiach, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, shall appear a second time, apart from sin, to those waiting for him to deliverance. So there you go. That's what Yahusha did. So he went up, presented himself to Yahuwah as a wave offering. He sprinkled his blood on the tent, everything up on the set-apart place in the Shemayim. That was the true temple, and completed his job, completed the works that he had to do. Okay, so he fulfilled the sacrifice, did exactly what he had to do with his blood, and that was sprinkle everything up on the Shemayim's temple with his blood and stand before Yahuwah as the wave offering for our sins. First fruits. He was the first fruit of the resurrection. So the first fruit of many brethren to follow in the family of Yahusha. You see it? So that's what he did. And that completed the task. When he appeared to Mary, he had not fulfilled it yet. That's why he said, don't touch me. I haven't completed this yet. Don't mess it up, man. Don't touch me. All right. So, again, this vitally important observance of Bikurim, or first fruits, or the wave offering, the sheaf offering, the waving of the Omar. It's called many things, but all means the same thing, okay? As a counterfeit, Satan has created a counterfeit called Easter that he tries to overshadow the importance of the wave offering and the work that Yahushua did. And he does it by trying to brainwash or program little kids' minds so that they grow up and continue to teach those traditions to their children. And then they grow up and teach it to their children. And before you know it, they're all living a lie. They're believing in a lie. And everybody's long forgotten about what Yahushua did. Okay, so he is risen is about the only thing they got right. And after that, it gets blurry, if you know what I mean. So don't fall for the traditions of men or the counterfeit day of Easter that Satan created to lead people astray. Trash can that thing. Don't even bring it up. Don't let your children practice it. And unfortunately, the public school districts teach it. Why they teach paganism to our children is beyond me. They should not be allowed to do it. Anything beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic, I think they should have no right to teach it to our children, but yet they do. Freely, willingly, deceivingly, they do it. And they get away with it. It's kind of sad. Okay, now let's read the scriptures of truth some more. And I'd like to point out that some people are confused about the resurrection. They're confused that there's two resurrections, much less one, and what it means to be woken up from sleep and or raised from the dead, as in Lazarus, okay, and so a few others. So hopefully after tonight's study, we will no longer be misled about this subject of the resurrection versus being woke up from sleep. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started in scriptures. And I guess the first place to go on this would be what most people know as the resurrection chapter. So everybody knows the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, right? But do they know 14, do they know, but do you know that the 1 Corinthians chapter 15 is the resurrection chapter? It explains the resurrection very well to us. Okay, so let's go there. 1 Corinthians, everybody. 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 13, I said it right the first time, is the love chapter. And then chapter 15, 1 Corinthians 15, is first fruits, or the resurrection chapter is what it's known as. So let's get into it. It's extremely powerful. So gird your loins, and let's go with it. It's powerful stuff. I'm warning you right now. But brothers, I make known to you the Besorah, which I brought as Besorah to you, which you also did receive, and in which you stand, through which also you are being delivered. If you hold fast that word I brought as Besorah to you, Otherwise, you have believed in vain. For I delivered to you at the first that which I also received, that Mashiach died for our sins according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised the third day according to the writings, and that he was seen by Peter, or Kepha, then by the 12. After that, he was seen by over 500 brothers at one time, of whom the greater part remain till now, but some have fallen asleep. So here we find out the dying is called falling asleep. Why? Because nobody's died yet until after the second death. Then you'll have died permanently. Okay, if you are being thrown into the outer darkness, that is. Okay, look. What this is saying is after Yahushua was resurrected, he was seen by Peter and 12 others, including women and men, and he was seen by over 500 people at one time. A group of 500 people saw him. So this is evidence that he rose from the dead. Because a lot of people saw him die and be buried, and now so far, 513 have seen him alive. After that, he was seen by Yakub. That's his brother, half brother. Then by all the emissaries. Look, Yakub, okay, and James and Yehuda, or Yakub, Jude, James are his kin. They're his half brothers. He was the oldest brother. These are little brothers. Now, you all know how much little brothers like to hang out with their big brother and how much they idolize those big brothers. You know, they copycat them. They want to be just like them. So they watch them like a hawk, and they try to imitate their big brothers. Do they not? Yeah, they do. I ain't never seen a little brother yet that didn't try to act like his big brother and went to tail along with him, doing the things he did. So this becomes a powerful witness. Yakub and James, who grew up, Yakub and Jude, who grew up with Yahushua, okay, now recognized him as who he said he was, Yahuwah incarnated. That's powerful, man. You can't get a better witness than that. Your own kin recognize you as the creator of the universe. Wow. Okay, and last of all, he was seen by me. This is Paul speaking here. Also, as if to one born prematurely. For I am the least of the emissaries, who am not worthy to be called an emissary, because I persecuted the assembly of Yahuwah. So Paul carried around the burden of all the persecutions he did to the followers of Yahushua. Okay, I don't think Paul ever got over it. Honestly, I don't. He questioned Yahuwah choosing him. Okay, he may have looked at it as it was his penalty. He was being punished because of what he did, and now he knows the truth, and so now it's severe punishment, both mentally and physically, because now he knows the truth. Put yourself in Paul's shoes, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, but by the favor of Yahuwah, I am what I am, and his favor toward me was not in vain, but I labored much more than they all. Yet not I, but the favor of Yahuwah with me, which would be Yahushua, the Ruach HaKodesh. Whether then it was I or they, so we proclaimed, and so you believed. And if Mashiach is proclaimed that he has been raised from the dead, how do some among you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? Now, this was talking about the Sadducees. They didn't believe in the resurrection, but the Pharisees did. Okay. And if there is no resurrection of the dead, then Mashiach has not been raised. And if Mashiach has not been raised, then our proclaiming is empty, and your belief also empty. That means you're lying then. If he hasn't been raised, we're all lying. We're all guilty of being liars. And we are also found false witnesses of Yahuah. See that? Liars. Because we have witnessed of Yahuah that he raised up Mashiach. So that's if it's not true, as the Sadducees suggest. But we know it is, right? So let's not get lost here in this. Whom he did not raise up, if then the dead are not raised. Okay. So if there's no resurrection and the Mashiach wasn't raised up or nobody's been raised up, nothing, nobody's going to be. It's all a lie. We're all living a lie. Okay. When we die, we're just dead. If there's no resurrection, what's the purpose? And Paul realizes that as he continues on here. For if the dead are not raised, then neither Mashiach has been raised. And if Mashiach has not been raised, your belief is to no purpose. You are still in your sins. Then also those who have fallen asleep in Mashiach have perished. Even the ones that believed in the promise of the coming deliverer, they died in vain too. Then if the resurrection's everything. That's our expectation, man. That's everything we're looking forward to, is eternal life and an immortal body. Otherwise, what are we doing? Why are we serving Yahuah if there's no such thing as a resurrection? There would be no reason to. It would just be a free-for-all. You see? So I don't understand why the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. I mean, what was their purpose then? What was the purpose of them serving the temple? It was self-serving. That's what. They were narcissists. They wanted all the esteem. They wanted to be worshipped and esteemed and live wealthy and prosperous and be famous and all this kind of stuff while they lived. So they went nuts. So they just used their role to manipulate the masses to get money and fame and fortune from them, and position and power. See? That's what they were doing. They had to be, because they did not believe in the resurrection. See that? Then also those who have fallen asleep in Mashiach have perished. If in this life only we have expectation in Mashiach, we are of all men the most wrenched. That means we're worse than anybody, because we're telling people that they can be delivered and resurrected and have immortality. And if that's not true, then we're wrenched people, man. We're leading people down the, making them do things they didn't need to do. They can go out and can become rich and powerful and party and go crazy and live their life to the fullest. If there's no punishment, there's no resurrection or anything after this life, then we're the most wrenched. We're stealing people what they could be and what they could do with their life, because we're saying don't do it. Worship Yahuah. Expect the resurrection from the dead. So we're the more wrenched. If it's not true, then we're worse than anybody. We're going around telling people this stuff. That's what Paul's saying. Figure that out. But now Mashiach has been raised from the dead. So truly he has been raised from the dead. Okay. Many witnesses saw him alive after his death, and has become the first fruit of those having fallen asleep. So there you go. From all the ones that have fallen asleep, he was the very first one to be resurrected. Hence comes in the false teaching that there was other people were resurrected before Yahusha. Okay? And the only reason they say that Yahusha is being called the first fruits of the resurrection is because he's the first one to enter into the family of Yahuwah. That's the way they reason that. I'm going to provide some evidence here that proves that that's not true, at least in my opinion. And has become the first fruit of those having fallen asleep. For since death is through a man, resurrection of the dead is also through a man. For as all died in Adam, so also all shall be made alive in Mashiach, or the second Adam, if you will. And each in his own order. Mashiach, the first fruits. So this is the first one. It's in order here now. So when it has to do with the resurrection, okay, in order. The first one is Mashiach. He's the first fruits. That means he's the first and the best of the spiritual harvest of Yahuwah. He's the waving of the barley, the Omar. Then those who are of Mashiach at his coming. Bam. So the first fruits are Mashiach. And then at his second coming, everyone that is resurrected that has Mashiach in him, that have died with Mashiach in them, and the ones that remain alive at his second coming that has a Ruach HaKodesh in them. They're the first fruits, and he's the first fruit of many brothers. So there it is. That's the promise. Promise of the resurrection from the dead. That someday, if you happen to go into that grave before Yahushua returns, that he's going to resurrect you and bring you out of that grave so that you can be alive forevermore. In other words, he's going to give you an immortal body, change your body into immortality in the blink of an eye. Then the end. See, after that happens, the first resurrection. Okay, so the first fruit, the first to be resurrection, will come back and redeem his brethren, those who are of Mashiach, and they would participate in the first resurrection of the brethren of the family of Yahushua, the bride, if you will. Okay, then the end, it says. When he delivers up the reign of Yahuwah, the Father, when he has brought to nothing all rule and all authority and power. For he has to reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy to brought to nothing is death. For he has put all under his feet, but when he says all are put under him, it is clear that he who put all under him is accepted. And when all are made subject to him, then the Son himself shall also be subject to him, speaking of Yahuwah, who put all under him, in order that Yahuwah be all in all. Otherwise, what shall they do who are immersed for the dead, if the dead are not raised at all? Why indeed are they immersed for the dead? And why do we stand in danger every hour? So why are we worried about it if the resurrection ain't true? Why are we worried about it? About death, if the resurrection ain't true. I affirm by the boasting in you which I have in Mashiach Yahushua, our master, I die yom by yom. And as men do, I have fought with beasts at Ephesus. Of what good is it to me if the dead are not raised? Now, is he talking about fighting lions, tigers, and bears? No, he's talking about fighting pagans. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. See, there you go. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. So, if there's no resurrection, let's go nuts. Do not be led astray. Evil company corrupts good habits. So don't hang around with evil company. Wake up to soberness righteously and do not sin, for some do not have the knowledge of Yahuah. So there you go. There's the dividing line. So the Nazarene have the knowledge of Yahuah. So we know that we ain't going to say, let us eat and drink for tomorrow we die, and just go crazy and do whatever we want. No laws, just live a lawless lifestyle, have a lawless society, just go crazy. The strong survive, only the strong survives or whatever. We know better than that. So we ain't going to act like that, right? Because we know that he was resurrected, and that his promises is true and trustworthy. I speak this to your shame, to the shame of those that don't have the knowledge of Yahuah, that do not know the truth. But someone might say, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come? Senseless one, what you sow is not made alive unless it dies. Ooh, wow, that's powerful. And as to what you sow, you do not sow the body which is to be, but a bare grain. It might be wheat or some other grain. But Yahuah gives it a body as he wishes, and to each seed a body of its own. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one flesh of men, and another flesh of beasts, and another of fishes, and another of birds. And there are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the esteem of the heavenly is truly one, and the esteem of the earthly is another. One esteem of the sun, and another esteem of the moon, and another esteem of the stars. For star differs from star in esteem. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption. It is raised in incorruption. It is sown in disrespect. It is raised in esteem. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a physical body. It is raised a Ruach-like body. There is a physical body and there is a Ruach-like body. And so it has been written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, a life-giving Ruach. The Ruach-like, however, was not first, but the physical, and afterward the Ruach-like. The first man was of the Eretz, earthly. The second man is the master from heaven, which would be Yahuah. As is the earthly, so also are those who are earthly. And as is the heavenly, so also are those who are heavenly. And as we have borne the likeness of the earthly, we shall also bear the likeness of the heavenly. So what this is Paul saying here is we're going to get an immortal body, a new body. It's going to be a spiritual-like body. And this I say, brothers, that flesh and blood is unable to inherit the reign of Yahuah, neither does corruption inherit incorruption. See, I speak a secret to you. Okay, here we go. We're going to get to hear a secret. Now, everybody listen. You're going to tell us a secret here. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet shall sound. That's going to be on the day of trumpets. It's the first fall appointed time. And the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible has to put on incorruption, and this mortal to put on immortality. And when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall come to be the word that has been written. Death is swallowed up in overcoming. O death, where is your sting? Grave, where is your overcoming? See, this is speaking of the resurrection now. And the sting of death is the sin, and the power of the sin is the Torah. But thanks to Yahuwah who gives us the overcoming through our Master Yahushua Mashiach. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the work of the Master, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Master. So there you go. That's all about the resurrection there now, first fruits. It's worth reading that about 20 times very slowly and letting it sink in to where you got a clean understanding, a clear understanding of what's being said there by Paul. Thankfully, that 15th chapter in 1 Corinthians is not a chapter that's hard to understand. A lot of Paul's writings are, but that one's not. It's fairly clear. And so we shouldn't have a problem understanding what Paul's saying there. Basically, he's saying the resurrection is true and it has witnesses, and those who think otherwise are goofy. All right, so let's take a look now then at 1 Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And we'll look at 14 and 16. Or 14, yeah. Let's go 13 to the end. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Now, brothers, we do not wish you to be ignorant concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you be sad as others who have no hope. So this is one of the, this letter here is one of the ones that just kind of like, I think, plainly speaks of the first resurrection. And people who believe in the rapture use this to prove there's a pre-tribulation rapture. Okay, but it's not. See, they don't understand the first resurrection and the second resurrection. That's their problem. And they also don't understand the difference between those who've been resurrected and those have been woke up or raised up from their sleep. Okay, from their bed. Just say. For if we believe that Yahushua died and rose again, so also Yahuwah shall bring with him those who sleep in Yahushua. For this we say to you by the word of the Master, that we, the living who are left over at the coming of the Master, shall in no way go before those who are asleep. Because the Master himself shall come down from heaven with a shout, with the voice of a chief messenger, and with the trumpet of Yahuwah. And the dead in Mashiach shall rise first. So those who have fallen asleep will be woke up and they will be risen first out of their grave. Then we, the living, who are left over, shall be caught away together with them in the clouds to meet the Master in the air. And so we shall always be with the Master. So then encourage one another with these words. So yeah, it's pretty plain. The dead, the second coming of Yahushua, he's coming back. He's in the air still. He hasn't put feet on the dust yet. And the first resurrection, the ones that are in the grave, will be resurrected first and given immortality. See, there's where I think the thin line is. Okay, I believe the resurrection is connected to immortality. And then the ones that remain and are witnesses to this and are alive at the time and are witnessing all this happening, the return of Yahushua, the graves opening up, dead people coming up out of the graves, will be changed and given their immortality, and then together the first resurrection of the dead and those that remain alive, who've all been given their immortal bodies, will be caught up where Yahushua is as he descends down upon the Eretz, Mount of Olives to be specific. Okay? But the dead are given, raised up and given, and their bodies are changed in immortality first, which is only fair, if you think about it. Okay, so interesting, isn't it? So let's get a look now at Revelations 20. So go to Revelations 20. It's all about immortality, Bikurim. It's powerful, man. So let's go to Revelations 20. Let's look at verse 4 through 6 real quick. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was given to them, and the lives of those who had been beheaded because of the witness they bore to Yahushua. Okay, so this is talking about two sets of people here now. Okay, and I saw thrones, and they sat on them. Okay, that's and judgment was given to them, and the lives of those who had been beheaded. So this is two groups of people. You see that? Who had been beheaded because of the witness they bore to Yahushua, and because of the word of Yahuwah, and who did not worship the beast nor his image, and did not receive his mark upon their foreheads or upon their hands. And they lived and reigned with Mashiach for 1,000 years. And the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. Blessed and set apart is the one having part in the first resurrection. See, there it is, the first resurrection group that we just read about. Okay, in First Thessalonians 4. The second death possesses no authority over these, but they shall be priests of Yahuwah and of Mashiach, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. There's your millennium reign, your seventh day of peace. See that? So all those with the Ruach takes part in the first resurrection, whether they've fallen asleep or they're alive at the second coming. All right. So where it says here that, see, they shall be priests of Yahuwah and of Mashiach, and shall reign. Well, reign means you're a king, you're an authority. Okay, if you have a reign, so you're a priest and you're a king. And they sat on them. It's all thrones, plural. And they sat on them, and judgment was given to them. And the lives of those who had been beheaded because of the witness that they bore of Yahushua. The ones that didn't take the mark of the beast or anything like that were there as well. You see what I'm saying? So to me, there's this group of I don't know how many that are going to be in the first resurrection, but then there's going to be the cream of the crop, if you will. There's going to be another small group that's going to be priests and kings with him, which is going to be his bride. And they're going to be taken from this larger first resurrection group. They're all going to be there, but a small amount of people will be the bride, and the rest of them will be there as well in the first resurrection. And they came out of the great tribulation. This is talking about the 1,000-year millennium reign, is it not? Yes, it is. And they lived and reigned with Mashiach for 1,000 years. So this is telling us about what's happening in the millennium reign. That's what it's talking about. Look at, since we're talking about that, look at Revelations 21:27. 21:27. Revelations 20, 21, and 22 is pretty much in chronological order of happenings. Okay. Everything else really isn't. But 20, 21, 22 is in chronological order of the events. Okay. So look at 21, 27. It says, and there shall by no means enter into it whatever is unclean. Speaking of this new city, okay. Neither anyone doing abominations and falsehood, but only those who are written in the Lamb's scroll of life. All right. So this tells me then that the new city, which at 21 talks about the new heaven and the new earth and the new city. It says in verse 5, and he who was sitting on the throne said, see, I make all things new. So it's all new. It's not renewed. It was restored or renewed for the millennium reign, but he's getting rid of all that now, and that's all going to be new. It says so in verse 5. And he who is sitting on the throne said, see, I make all things new. Okay, and right, for these words are true and trustworthy. So that tells me, then the millennium reigns over, the new city comes down, Yahuwah and his bride reside in the new city, and there shall by no means enter into it what is unclean, neither anyone doing abomination or falsehood, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life, means that it comes after the great throne judgment. And everything's new now. And then the new city comes down. And it's the house of Yahuwah and his bride. But everybody can come in and out of it. But it's after everybody's been judged. It's in eternity, man. Because no abomination or falsehood can come into it. If it came down at the beginning of the millennium reign, then there's still abominations and falsehoods are still going to be on the earth. Because flesh and blood will still exist during the 1,000-year millennium reign. Because at the end of the 1,000-year millennium reign, Satan's cut loose for a little while, and he gets an army, Gog and Magog, and marches against the camp of the saints. You see it? So the new city has to come after the millennium reign, after the great white throne. Look, the unrighteous will never see the new city, ever. They'll be long gone. They'll never get to see the bride, the new city. Never, ever, never, never, ever. They will be destroyed by then. So the new city comes down after the great white throne judgment, after he's made a new heaven and an earth, made all things new. Okay? All right, so I think it's clear. Let's look at Revelations 20. Let's get back on track. 11 through 15. And I saw a great white throne and him who was sitting on it, from whose face the rats in the heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before the throne. And scrolls were opened, and another scroll was opened, which is of life. The scroll that was opened first there is the recordings of your words and your works, every single person that ever lived. And then once that evidence is presented, then they see who is judged right by Yahuwah, who's in the Lamb's book of life. So then it becomes a roll call. If your name's in that book, you shall live. If it's not, you are going to be thrown into the outer darkness. And the dead were judged from what was written in the scrolls, according to their works. See that? And the sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death in the grave gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one according to his works. And the death in the grave were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. See, the second death. And if anyone was not found written in the scroll of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Okay, so this here is speaking of what? The first resurrection? No, the second resurrection. See, there's two resurrections. The first resurrection are all those who are going to be kings and priests and rule on the restored earth with Yahusha for 1,000 years. But after the 1,000 years comes the great white throne judgment, and this says resurrection of all flesh that's ever lived. And they will be judged by their works. And their names will be in, if they're going to live and be allowed into eternity, then they will see the new city come down, and they will see the bride. But those who are judged wrong, second death, they get thrown into the lake of fire and annihilated, permanently removed from the presence of Yahuwah for eternity. The second death, a horrible death. See, so the second resurrection is a chance, a second chance for all those who lived to be judged by their works and what they said, their words and works, what they said and what they did. You know, and if they're judged right by Yahuwah, then they get to come into eternal reign. If not, then they have to experience the second death. So they are resurrected the second time. They've been given life, but they could lead to the second death. They have to die again. But it's a permanent death this time. Those who are in the first resurrection, the second death has no power over them. So they will not have to be judged. They've already been judged. They've already got their immortal bodies. You think Yahushua's going to take away their immortal body and make them stand in judgment again and then throw them into the lake of fire? No. There would be no need for them to be judged a second time. All right. Okay, so that's the first resurrection, the second resurrection, and the second death or eternal life, depending on their works, okay? All right, let's look quickly at Revelations 14. Well, we're in Revelations. So Revelations 14, 1-5 says, "And I looked and I saw a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written upon their foreheads. And I heard a voice out of the heaven like the voice of many mayhem and like the voice of loud thunders. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a renewed song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one was able to learn that song except for the 144,000 who were redeemed from the Eretz. Those are those who were not defiled with women, for they were maidens." Remember the parable of the 10 maidens, wise and foolish maidens? It kind of refers over to that. They are those following the Lamb wherever he leads them. They were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to Yahuwah. So here you go. Here's the first fruits. Okay, so is this the entire batch? No, because we just read that there's two groups in the first resurrection. The ones that were beheaded and didn't take the mark of the beast on their forehead or on their hand. Remember? They were redeemed from men, being first fruits to Yahuwah and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no falsehood, for they are blameless before the throne of Yahuwah. Wow. Okay, so no lie in them. In other words, they ain't going to run around teaching people about fairy tales and mythology and fables and Easter bunnies and Santa Claus and stuff. Okay, they're not doing that. They're cleaned up. They haven't been defiled because they've been so cleaned up that the Ruach HaKodesh is now living in them and has them sealed for the day of redemption. They've been given back their virgin status. That means he remembers their sins no more. They're not dirty anymore. Okay, so the key here is that having his father's name written on their foreheads. This is the seal of the bride. Okay, and it goes even on deeper into the scriptures. Every time it talks about the 144,000, it mentions that his name is in their forehead all through the scriptures here. And so you can see then that this is identifying the bride. Okay. And so, like I said, there's going to be a large group. Scripture says it's going to be such a large group of those who will be beheaded beneath the altar, the parable beneath the altar, okay, that no man can count them. But the entire group is going to be in the part of the first resurrection, obviously, but they're not going to be, from what we read prior, but there's going to be a small group, the cream of the crop, taken from this large group, or at least mixed with this large group as far as the first resurrection goes, that's going to be the bride. And they're going to have his name written on their forehead, having his father's name written upon their foreheads. That's the seal of the bride, man. The seal of the first resurrection group is the Ruach HaKodesh, has their spirit, if you will, sealed for the day of redemption, which is the first resurrection. He died for that group. And he's coming back for his property. Okay? But there's going to be a second chance for people during the second resurrection that could lead to either eternal life with Yahuwah in his first resurrection group, or the second death, thrown into the lake of fire, which is the second death, and annihilated permanently. See, Bikurim has some huge impactations to it, man. It's mind-boggling. It's powerful stuff. I don't know why people ignore it as much as they do, but I have a sneaking suspicion that's because of the counterfeit, Satan's counterfeit, that is mixed in that day, which is the bunny rabbit dude. Takes a lot of attention off of this first resurrection in Yahusha, the first fruit. Sad but true. So anyway, yeah, there's just a ton of things I would like to go into. I don't want to go into them all. Of course, we can find the account of Yahusha's resurrection in Matthew, Mark, in John, and Luke, but we don't have time to read all those accounts, but I think I'll pick one and we'll read that one. Maybe we'll do Luke. He seems to give a little bit more detail, although he's not a firsthand witness to this. But before we do that, though, let's go to James. Let's just look at a few short verses here, then we'll go to James. I'm not cherry picking. I'm just trying to point out different areas where that proves that he was resurrected. So James, I guess we can go to James 1, if you will. James 1. James 1, 17 and 18 says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from Yahuwah, from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no change, no shadow of turning. Having purposed it, he brought us forth by the word of truth, for us to be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. And so there you see that we're not the first fruit, which is Yahusha, but we are kind of first fruits of his creatures that will be given, will be resurrected. See that? So it speaks of the first resurrection. Everybody sees that. Okay, so now let's get a look at First Peter real quick here. Go to First Peter. First Peter 1 and verse 3 through 9, I guess. Blessed be the Elohim and follower of our Master Yahushua Mashiach, who according to his great compassion has caused us to be begotten from above, born again, right, of the water and the Ruach, to a living expectation through the resurrection of Yahushua Mashiach from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled and unfading, having been kept in the Shemayim for you. So your expectation is in the Shemayim, which is obviously your immortal body that you'll be getting. Right? Who are protected by the power of Elohim through belief for deliverance ready to be revealed in the last time, in which you exult, even though for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by manifold trials, in order that the proving of your belief, much more precious than gold that perishes and proven by fire, might be found to result in praise and respect and esteem at the revelation or the unveiling of Yahushua Mashiach. That's his second coming. Speaking of his second coming. Whom have not seen you love, whom having not seen you love, in whom you exalt with unspeakable and esteemed joy, yet not seeing, but believing, obtaining the goal of your belief, deliverance of lives. There you go. So that speaks of the resurrection, of course, and being born again and eternal salvation, okay, through our resurrection. Boy, I'll tell you what, man, the last generation that remains alive at his coming and get transferred in a blink of an eye, what a blessed generation that is. Wow, those people are still alive, you know. Wow. No wonder it says, where's your sting, O death? Whew. Powerful stuff, man. All right, look at Colossians. Go to Colossians. Colossians 1:18. We're all familiar with this one, I'm pretty sure. And he is the head of the body, the assembly. So the body of Yahushua is the assembly. Who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. So there it is. He's the firstborn from the dead. That he might become the one who is first in all. In all. Because in him all the fullness was well pleased to dwell. And through him to completely restore to favor all to himself, whether on Eretz or in the Shemayim, having made peace through the blood of his stake. Wow, wow, wow. There you go. The firstborn of creation, the firstborn of the dead from the dead, the firstborn of all things. He's the first in all things. Powerful, man. So there you go. So firstborn from the dead is just like saying the first to be resurrected from the dead, right? So this kind of encompasses a little bit, or at least overlaps the scriptures that speaks of being woke up from sleeping, which Lazarus, I believe, falls into that category. All right. So let's. What I'm trying to say is, look, there's a difference between the resurrection and someone being woke up that has fallen asleep. And Yahuwah says they fell asleep. They're not dead unless they get thrown into the lake of fire. And that's called the second death because it's permanent. All right. You can say they died. There's nothing horribly wrong with that. But if you want to be more attuned to Scripture, saying that they have fallen asleep is the better way of saying that, because they have not been judged yet. Nobody's been judged yet. Even the Ruachs that left their principality have not been given death yet. They're chained up in the abyss, waiting on the white throne judgment themselves. They're in the deepest darkness places of the earth, waiting on judgment day themselves. They have not even been judged yet. Nobody's been judged yet. All right. So, yeah, no doubt about it. It says that Yahusha was the firstborn from the dead here. And now let's get a look here before we get into the difference, what the difference is between being resurrected or woke up from sleep. Let's get into the story here a little bit in Luke. So we find that, let's just go to Luke 23 first. This is mostly in Luke 24. But let's look at Luke 23 here a little bit before we get there. Yeah, let's go to like 46. Luke 23, 46 through the end to 56. Okay, so Luke 23, 46 through 56 real quick. And we'll get into the heart of the matter here. All right, so it says, and crying out with a loud voice, Yahusha said, Father, into your hands I commit my Ruach. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now, a lot of people say, see, right there, it proves that there's at least two God heads on the one body. And no, it does not. And so what this is that Yahusha being fully human, he was exactly like us. So we have what? So we have a fleshly body. We have a ruach. We have a being, if you want to say that. But that being is more with the ruach. It's who makes us. It makes us who we are. It's all our attributes, our likes, our dislikes, our emotions, our thoughts, stuff like that, our personality, which I think is contained within the Ruach. But you can say that. There's nothing really wrong with saying a body, a being in the Ruach. The scripture mentions that, actually. So anyways, when he said, Father, into your hands I commit my Ruach, this was the incarnation speaking. This was the Son of Elohim speaking. Okay. When we say Son of Elohim, it always refers to the incarnation, which Yahusha having two natures, I would be speaking of the human nature speaking here now, and on which Yahuwah allowed the incarnation to speak, because he was fully existed. He existed fully, just like we do. He was just like us in that way. In that human nature, he was just like us. Okay, so we can't downplay or minimize what he did by saying he was Elohim, because he was fully like us, fully human in his human nature. So his human nature, I said, into your hands I commit my Ruach. And then having say this, he breathed his last. He stopped breathing the breath of life. In Yahuwah simply disrobed himself of his flesh. But when he did that, he took the Ruach with him. Why? Because that Ruach didn't have to fall asleep or anything. That Ruach was perfectly woven or intertwined with the Ruach HaKodesh. So when the Ruach HaKodesh disrobed himself, the Ruach in the man, in the human side of Yahusha, who was real, just like us, went with him. They can't be separated. They're linked eternally. Okay, and so this is with the Son speaking. All right. And the captain, seeing what took place, praised Elohim, saying, "Truly this man was righteous." And when all the crowds who had gathered to that sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. And all those who knew him and the woman who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching this. So the women were witnesses to this through the entire thing, even to his burial. Okay. And see, a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and righteous man, he was not agreeing with their counsel. Indeed, from Ramathaim, a city of the Yehudim, who himself was also waiting for the reign of Yahuwah, he, going to Pilate, asked for the body of Yahusha. And taking it down, he wrapped it in linen and laid it in the tomb, hewn out of the rock, where no one was yet laid, and it was preparation yom, and the Sabbath was approaching. And the woman who had come with him, so it was preparation yom, and the Shabbat was approaching, means there were two Shabbats this week. Okay, so the Shabbat that was approaching was the first day of unleavened bread. Okay, so it was the day before that, just as it was getting to be dark. It was in the evening, and they were making haste to get him down, cleaned up, wrapped up, and put and sealed into the tomb before the sun went down, because then it would be the high Shabbat, a high one, which first day of unleavened bread. It's exactly what's happening this week. Exactly. And the woman who had come with him from Galilee followed after and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. See, the women witnessed the whole thing. They even went and watched where they put his body and what they did to it and everything. They witnessed the whole event. And having returned, they prepared spices and perfumes, and they rested on the Shabbat according to the command. So they got back home before it got dark, after they witnessed where they put his body and what they did and everything. They rolled the stone over there. They knew where he was laid, and they went back home and got in their house just before it became dark and became Shabbat, the high Shabbat, which would be the first day of unleavened bread. All right. And on the first day of the week, okay, so that would have been after Shabbat, the weekly Shabbat, and when it got dark, it began the first day of the week. At early dawn, so it would have went through midnight and then up to just about at dawn. Early dawn means the sun was just starting, wasn't even peeking over the horizon yet. You could just see the light from it starting to be revealed that it was coming. You couldn't see the sun yet. Early dawn, they came to the tomb, bringing the spices which they had prepared. So they prepared that when? Well, before the Shabbat came, before the high Shabbat. All right? That's what it says anyway. So they came to the tomb, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. And having entered, they did not find the body of the master, Yahusha. Okay, so he was gone by the time they got there, which was early dawn. It was still dark on the first Yom of the week, which would have, we all know, would have been the sun's day, right? And it came to be, as they were perplexed about this, that see, two men stood by them in radiant garments, so they were glowing. And becoming frightened and bowing their faces to the earth, they said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has been raised." Okay, so that means he was raised prior to them getting there, prior to early dawn. Remember how he spoke to you and he was still in Galilee, saying the Son of Adam has to be delivered into the hands of sinners and be staked, and the third Yom rise again. And they remembered his words. And having returned from the tomb, they reported all this to the 11 and to all the rest. And it was Miriam from Magdala and Yochanan, and Miriam, the mother of Yaqub, and the rest with them, who told this to the emissaries. And their words appeared to them to be nonsense, and they did not believe them because they were women. That's why they didn't believe them. So this 3 days and 3 nights, so Yahusha died around the 9th hour on the preparation day, which would have been the 4th day. And he stayed on that stake until they went around, asked Pilate if they could have him. They went back. The Roman soldiers were given a message from Pilate to, break their legs, make sure they're dead, then let them have the body. They were in a frenzy to get him down because the high Shabbat was coming, and plus they were under strict Torah law anyway, that all dead bodies had to be taken down before Shabbat came. And he was placed in that tomb just before it got dark on preparation day, probably with only a few minutes to spare, is what I would say. So at this point, then, the time starts ticking because Yahusha prophesied and gave a sign, a single sign to that generation. And it was the sign of Jonah in the belly of the great fish, of the whale, if you will. Okay, 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish. So he gave them that one sign. So in order for the resurrection to be true, this sign, the only sign that Yahusha gave that generation, had to be performed precisely. So that means from his death to his resurrection had to be 72 hours exactly. Not even any minutes to spare, really. It had to be exact, as he said it would be. Keep that in mind. But Kepha arose and ran to the tomb, and stooping down, he saw the linen wrappings lying by themselves. So these were linen wrappings. Visualize a mummy. They would take strips of linen and then put them in some made up paste, and just wrap them with all these strips of linen. So he wasn't wrapped in some shroud or coat or robe or something. He was wrapped with strips of linen like they do mummies. And he saw the linen wrappings, see, it was linen wrappings, lying by themselves. So they were off by themselves in a pile. They must all just fell off of him. He probably disappeared. And they just crumbled to the ground in a big pile where he was standing. That's probably what happened. I don't see him sitting there unwrapping himself. I say he just disappeared or translated, and all the wrappings just fell to the floor. Lying by themselves, and he went away home, marveling at what took place. And see, two of them were going that same yom to a village called Emmaus, which was 12 kilometers from Jerusalem. These two were a married couple. They were Yahusha's aunt and uncle. You can see John 19:25 for more information on these two people. And they were talking to each other of all this which had taken place. And it came to be as they were talking and reasoning that Yahushua himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were restrained, so they did not know him. And he said to them, "What are these words you are exchanging with each other as you are walking? And you are sad." And the one whose name was Leophas answering said to him, "Are you the lone visitor in Jerusalem who does not know what took place in it these Yamim?" And he said to them, "What?" And they said to him concerning Yahushua of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before Elohim and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and staked him. We, however, were expecting that it was he who was going to redeem Yisrael. But besides all this, today is the third Yom since these things took place. And certain women of ours who arrived at the tomb early also astonished us when they did not find his body. They came saying that they had also seen a vision of messengers who said he was alive. All right. So here it's pretty plain then that he's not in the tomb anymore. Okay. And this is still the first day, it sounds like. And some of those with us went to the tomb and found it, as also the women had said, but they did not see him. And he said to them, "Thoughtless ones and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Mashiach to suffer these and to enter into his esteem?" And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he was explaining to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. All right, so obviously this is the Mashiach walking with this couple now. And they approached the village where they were going, and he seemed to be going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the yam has declined." And he went in to stay with them. And it came to be, when he sat at the table with them, having taken the bread, he blessed, and having broken, he was given it to them. So obviously then this was still the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay. And it was almost the second day. Not quite, but almost. And so the word broken here would indicate matzah. Because when you break matzah, like a cracker, right? So when you break it or snap it or break it or something, right, to divide it, you wouldn't tear it or cut it like you would a loaf of bread. And so this shows you this was still unleavened bread. The Feast of Unleavened Bread was still going on. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. So as soon as he allowed them to recognize them, obviously he must have been in a different form, and they didn't recognize him. And then he went back into his own form where he had walked as Yahushua, and then they recognized him, and then he just disappeared. All right. And they said to each other, was not our heart burning within us as he was speaking to us on the way? And as he was opening the scriptures to us? And rising up that same hour, they returned to Jerusalem. So they got up right as it was dark and went and walked back to Jerusalem. So they couldn't sleep, right? Their minds was blown. So they man, I can't sleep. Let's go back to Jerusalem type deal. And found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, the master was truly raised and has appeared to Simon. And they related what took place on the way and how he was recognized by them at the breaking of the bread. And as they were saying this, Yahushua himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, Shalom to you. And being startled and frightened, they thought they had seen a phantom. This is crazy, man. Every time Yahushua seems to appear to people, they always think he's a phantom. And when he walked on water, they thought he was a phantom. Now they think he appeared to them through the walls. They just appeared right there to him. He was a phantom. Amazing if you think about that. I don't want to get off on that tangent, but that's crazy. And he said to them, why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? So they were even doubting that it was him. They thought it was a phantom, right? See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see. For a phantom does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have. So although they always acknowledge him as a phantom, this also acknowledges to us that phantoms do exist. So if someone tells you they saw a phantom or a ghost or something, I wouldn't call them a liar or doubt them. The scripture itself acknowledges they exist. Yahushua never, ever rebukes somebody who thinks he's a phantom. If they didn't exist, wouldn't he say, why do you think I'm a phantom? Phantoms don't exist. He never says that. So obviously they must exist. But amazing here then, Yahushua, not only could he disappear, walk through walls, defy gravity, translate, okay, he could also return back into his fleshly body. And because he says, look, I have flesh and bones, as you see I have. And plus he ate and drank after his resurrection. So apparently then, if we have a body similar to Yahushua's when we're resurrected, then if we choose to, it seems as though we'll be able to go back into our fleshly bodies if we want and eat and drink. If you want to, that's what it seems. But maybe not. That's just me saying that. Now, I'm not saying you can do it or you will be able to do it. Maybe just Yahushua can do it. I don't know. But since we're going to be Yahuwah's body together with Yahushua, perhaps then we can do it because he can do it. But anyway, in saying this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they were still not believing for joy, they still weren't believing it was him. And marveling, he said to them, have you any food here? And they give him a piece of broiled fish and some honeycomb. And taking it, he ate in their presence. See that? So he was back in being a fleshly body again with the wounds, and he was eating and drinking, even though he was Ruach. So he can do anything he wants. Now, let me ask you a question. Did Yahushua have to leave the throne in the Shemayim to come down onto the earth and appear to these people and eat so he could eat and drink? No, he was already there. He doesn't have to leave one place to go to the other. He's already there. And he can be or do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and how he wants. So we can't limit Yahuwah. He can do whatever, wherever, whenever, and however. Okay? So all we can do is be totally amazed at his marvelousness, his Elohimness. Just marvel. That's all we can do. and understand that he's everywhere at once, knows everything, and is all powerful. Just marvel at him. Don't try to define him. Can't do it. You can't confine him. You can't confine him. You can't put him in a little box. You can't stick him in this between these covers and tell him to stay there. He can do whatever he wants. Just marvel of him and praise him and worship him. Sing about him. Tell people about his greatness. That's all we can do. So he ate it in their presence. They saw him eating it. And he said to them, "These are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all have to be concluded that were written in the Torah of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures and said to them, "Thus it has been written, and so it was necessary for the Mashiach to suffer and to rise again from the dead the third day." 72 hours. And that repentance and forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And you are witnesses of these things. And see, I am sending the promise of my Father upon you, which is the Ruach HaKodesh. But you are to remain in the city of Jerusalem until you are clothed with power from on high. And he led them out as far as Bethanol, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them. And it came to be while he was blessing them that he was parted from them and was taken up into the sky. And they, having bowed down to him, returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and were continually in the set apart place, praising and blessing Elohim. Amen. Okay, so this brings up an interesting point. If, because of the sign of Jonah, Yahusha gave to the people in that generation, this had to be performed precisely. So if Yahusha was staked and died on the fourth day, just at dusk, just minutes before the fifth day started in the evening, I'd just say minutes, was in that tomb. Okay, that's the starting point of that sign. And so from that particular point, which I'm going to say was at evening on the fifth day, when it started, I think just minutes, and then the fifth day came. Okay. A lot of people say, "Oh, you got to use the little bit of daylight that was left on the fourth day. That counts as a whole day." No, it doesn't. It counts as a couple minutes before dark, before evening. That's ridiculous to say that. So really, his death started at the beginning of the fifth day. So 72 hours. And I'm going to use the word exactly. 72 hours after his death, put in that tomb, he was buried, to when he was resurrected would have been at twilight, at the dawn, dusk, right before night came, dusk on Shabbat, the weekly Shabbat, is when he was resurrected. That would have been 72 hours exactly. So just as Shabbat was over and the first day began, right there at dusk, there's a half hour of dusk and a half hour of dawn right after the sun rises or sets. Somewhere in that half hour is when he resurrected. And somewhere within that half hour is when he died. So complete a 72-hour period. Precisely. So then, in that case, what did he do that whole night until Mary saw him just prior to the sun coming up on the first day? It was still dark. Just before dawn. Who knows what he did? But when Mary saw him, he told her, "Don't touch me. I haven't ascended yet." So he didn't go. He didn't. We know he didn't go to up into the front of the throne of Yahuah. We know he didn't go back into the Shemayim. At least he did. He didn't go up there because he said, "I haven't ascended yet." So we don't really. He doesn't tell us what he did, but we know he didn't go there. Maybe he went down and visited the souls in the abyss. The beings in the abyss that were chained up down there. Maybe he was still down there. Who knows? I don't know what he was doing. Maybe he went back there, Who knows? It doesn't tell us. But we know that while it's still dark, just prior to dawn, he appeared to Mary, which would have been the first day. And then when he told Mary, "Go tell my brothers that I'm heading for my father's throne now. And to their father and to my father, my Elohim and your Elohim. I'm ascending now." So probably the time Mary turned around and started running back to tell him, that's when he ascended at that point. And he went up there and did what Hebrews told us he did when we read Hebrews. And then he came back. He came back for 40 days. He came back for 40 days. Before he left again to become the Ruach HaKodesh, the comforter. Went back into the Shemayim to be the firstborn of all creation again. He came down to be the firstborn of many brethren in the flesh. So anyway, we really don't know what he did, during that night period. But if he couldn't have stayed in the tomb, because that would have put him over that 72-hour period. Have been more like 80 hours, and then so that sign wouldn't have been true. The sign of Jonah. See what I'm saying? So there it is. It had to be fulfilled precisely. It was the only sign he gave to that crooked generation. All right. So that pretty much tells us then that a resurrection then has to do with immortality. So therefore, he's the only one that's been resurrected. He's the firstborn from the dead. And so his mortal body was given immortality back. And so when a son was given, when he was sent as the firstborn of all creation, the spiritual body of Yahushua, which he was the firstborn of all creation, he sent down into the womb of Mary, and he became robed in flesh somehow and became a human being instead of a spiritual body of Yahuwah. In the greatness of the entire universe was in him, says he emptied himself of all of creation was in him. And he came down to the belly of Mary, became robed in flesh, and was born as a human being and walked the earth in his incarnation. He was incarnated at that, and then Yahuwah dwelt in him fully in that body. He was fully in there. Did he have to leave the Shemayim, the universe, in Africa or Mars or anywhere out there in order to be inside of Yahushua? No, he was already there. You ain't got to live anywhere to go somewhere. He's already there. So the first resurrection then has to do with immortality. If you're going to be resurrected. Okay. It doesn't have to do with somebody fell asleep or died and then bringing them up back into their human bodies, and so that they can walk around on the dust again for a time period till they die again. That's it. Okay. Does that mean that they violated that every men have to die once and then the judgment? No, not really. He just continued their life, gave them an extension on their life. So I mean, I'd take it. I wouldn't argue about it. I don't know about you, but anyways, to make the point a little bit clearer, and what I'm saying here is, let's examine some of these people that were raised from the dead or woke up from sleep. Okay, and so we can see the difference. All right. So far, the only body that's been resurrected, because Scripture cannot lie. It says that it's true that Yahuwah is the firstborn from the dead. Okay, period. All right, so that's all we've read about so far. Now we're going to read about those who've been woke up from the dead a little bit. Okay, so let's look at John. Let's start with Lazarus. We can see it. So Lazarus in John 11. Around 35. So John 11:35 says, Yahusha wept. The Yehudim therefore said, see how he loved him? And some of them said, was this one who opened the eyes of the blind not also able to prevent this one from dying? Yahusha therefore, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone laid against it. Yahusha said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him who had died, said to him, Master, already he smells, for it is 4 days. Yahusha said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe, you shall see the esteem of Yahuwah? So that the reason he lagged back and waited a couple days, he could have went there like on the day he heard about it. I think it would have been the first or second day that Lazarus did, but he didn't. He lingered back and waited for 4 days, and then he went. And the reason that was there was a fable, Yehudite fable, that there were a lot of fables from the Yehudim back then. And one of them was that when the body died, the Ruach hovered over the body for 4 days before it took off and went to wherever, Ruachs go, okay, according to this fable. And so Yahusha was making the point that you can't say that he wasn't dead because the Ruach didn't depart from him, yet the Ruach just went back into the body and he woke up, kind of like an out-of-body experience. And so he had to wait 4 days beyond their fable so they would say, man, he was stinking. He was dead. The Ruach was gone, man. He raised him from the dead and brought his Ruach back into him, and he's walking. And so they couldn't doubt his esteem. That's why he waited 4 days. There's a lot of Hebrew fables, man. It's like the rich man and Lazarus. It's not a parable. It's a Yehudim fable that the Pharisees were teaching as truth. And Yahusha made them look like idiots when he told them that the boat that crossed the great chasm was out of order. So he just basically shattered their fable. Okay, a lot of people think that's a parable that proves there's a heaven, but it's not. It all takes place in the underworld, number one. Doesn't even mention a heaven. But anyways, I want to get off on a tangent. But anyways, he still smelled. And so they took away the stone where the dead man was laid. And Yahusha lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me because of the crowd standing by, I said this in order that they believe that you sent me. So here he's speaking on that human nature level again as the Son, as the incarnation, which he was fully human. And when he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, Eleazar, come out. And he who died came out, bound feet and hand with wrappings, same way Yahushua was. He was wrapped up like a mummy. This was their practice. And his face was wrapped with a cloth. Now, Yahuwah's face didn't have the wrappings going up. It was also wrapped in a cloth and folded up neatly and laid on the bed of the tomb. Yahushua said to them, "Loosen him and let him go." Therefore, many of the Yehudim who had come to Miriam and had seen what Yahushua did believed in him. They believed in him because it was beyond 4 days. It was the fourth day, in which the Ruach would have parted in their fable. All right, so they had no way out but to believe, really. Okay, so this was a waking up of Lazarus, bringing him back from the dead, from being asleep. All right, it was not a resurrection. He was not given immortality. It doesn't speak of immortality at all. Just waking up. So let's look at a few more examples of that. Actually, if we look down here at John 12:1, it says, accordingly, Yahushua, 6 days before the Passover, came to Beth-Anal, where Elazar was, who had died, whom he raised from the dead. See that? So woke up. He woke him up. He didn't resurrect him. You see that? Who had died, whom he raised from the dead. So he didn't really resurrect him. Because, like I said, resurrection involves immortality. They were all out to get him. They wanted to kill Elazar as well as they did Yahushua. So if they were out to get him to kill him, that means Elazar could die again. He didn't have immortality. He wasn't disappearing and appearing stuff and doing all these things that Yahushua could do in his immortal body. It tells you that in 9. Then a great crowd of the Yehudim learned that he was there, and they came, not on account of Yahushua only, but also to see Elazar, who he had raised from the dead. And the chief priests solved to kill Elazar as well, because on account of him, many of the Yehudim went away and believed in Yahushua, because he didn't raise him till the fourth day, which destroyed their fable. See, it debunked their fable. Get it? All right, so let's move on from there to Matthew. Go to Matthew. Be Matthew 27. Matthew 27, 52 through 54. Now, this is where a lot of people try to say that when Yahushua died on the stake, that the graves down on the Mount of Olives down there were all opened, and the people who were dead came out of the graves and were walking around. Okay, which means all these people, doesn't really say how many, but all these people rose up out of the grave and was walking around, were resurrected before Yahushua was, because he was still on the dead, hanging on the stake. All right, this is what they say, but it's the truth in that. Well, if we read this passage very carefully, we'll find out that it's not true at all. So let's look at it. Let's go to 2750. Take a look at 2750. Actually, we'll stay there. Go to 2750 in Matthew. And Yahushua cried out again with a loud voice and gave up his Ruach. So there you go. He just died on the stake. Okay. And see, the veil of the temple, or the Mishkan, was torn in two from top to bottom. And the eretz was shaken, so there was an earthquake, and the rocks were split. The earthquake caused a crater, rocks to split, big rocks to split. I'm just going to say something real quick. I'm not going to get off on the tangent, but when the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, it eliminated the barrier between the carbon and the spiritual realm. Okay. That's all I'm going to say about that. And then 52 says, in the tombs, which was around where Yeshua was staked there by Jerusalem, outside of the walls, and the tombs were opened, and many bodies of the set apart ones who had fallen asleep were raised. So right there is when they get that. Okay, say all them people, the graves were open and they were all resurrected and they were walking around in Jerusalem. Okay, let's continue to read. Then it says, and coming out of the tombs after. See that big word, after? A-F-T-E-R, his resurrection. So after his resurrection, after Yahushua resurrected, after 72 hours, then these people came out of those tombs, were woke up. The only thing that happened prior to Yahushua's resurrection was the lids or the stones were rolled away from the graves. So the people didn't raise up, didn't walk yet. They just laid there in their tombs or in their graves until Yahushua was resurrected. Then they woke up at his resurrection. Make a little bit more sense? Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does, because it was just a type. It was a foreshadow. They weren't resurrected and given immortality, but they were woke up, and then they had to fall back to sleep sometime later, as far as we know. If all these people are still walking around on the earth today, it's only because of the will of Yahuwah, not because they're immortal. Otherwise, scripture would not be true. They went into the set-apart city, which was Jerusalem, and appeared to many people. So they only woke up, and many people saw them as proof that they came out of their grave after Yahushua's resurrection. And when the captain and those with him who were guarding Yahushua saw the earthquake and all that took place, they feared exceedingly, saying, truly, this was the Son of Elohim. There you go. So that debunks that. It's pretty clear here after his resurrection, after the resurrection of Yahushua, is when they actually woke up and went into the city, into Jerusalem, and people saw them. And they knew that very well that they were dead and now alive. And so they were woke up from their sleep. That's what they were. There's nothing says anything about immortality attached to this, other than they just were woke up and went in and walked around in the city and were seen by people. You see what I'm saying? So let's take a look now at Luke 7. So when Scripture says that he's the firstborn of the dead, or the firstborn, first of the resurrection, first fruits, it means what it says, man. It's not contradicting itself here. If we put it all into perspective, these people had to die again. And if they're still walking, it's just because of the will of Yahuwah, not because they've received immortality yet. The first resurrection happens at the second coming of Yahushua, not at the resurrection of Yahushua. The first resurrection happens at the second coming of Yahushua. It's very clear. We just read it in Revelations. Okay, so let's take a look here at Luke. We'll go back to Luke. And that'd be Luke 7. Let's go to Luke 7:11. So Luke 7:11 through 16 says, "And it came to be the next day that he went into a city called Naim, and many of his pupils went with him, and a large crowd. And see, as he came near the gate of the city, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a large crowd from the city was with her. And when the master saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, 'Do not weep.' And coming near, he touched the bier, and those bearing it stood still. And he said, 'Young man, I say to you, arise.' And he who was dead sat up and began to speak. And he gave him to his mother, and fear seized all. And they praised Elohim, saying, 'A great prophet has been raised up among us, and Elohim has visited his people.'" And so now these people are acknowledging that he's Yahuwah. So here you go again, man. This guy was woke up. He was not resurrected and given immortality. He's given back to his mom because it was the will of Yahuwah to do so. So who are we to say, well, he shouldn't have done that? Not me. I'm not going to say that. So let's get a look then. This was a boy, a male child of his mom. And so now let's get a look at a girl, example of a girl. And that would be just the next chapter over, Luke 8. And in Luke 8, in verse 40 through 56, it talks about a girl being woke up from the dead. "And it came to be when Yahushua returned that the crowds gladly received him, for they were all looking for him. And see, there came a man whose name was Jar, and he was a ruler of the congregation. And falling down at the feet of Yahushua, he was calling upon him to come to his house, because he had an only daughter about 12 years old, and she was dying. And as he went, the throng crowded upon him. And Enasha, having a flow of blood for 12 years, who, having spent all her wealth on physicians, was unable to be healed by any, came from behind and touched the tzitzits of his garment. And immediately her flow of blood stopped." Can you imagine that? Just bleeding for 12 years straight? Oh, man, well, must have been rough. "And Yahushua said, 'Who touched me?' And when all denied it, Peter and those with him said, 'Master, the throng crowds you and press upon you, and you say, Who touched me?' But Yahushua said, 'Somebody did touch me, for I knew power went out from me.' And the Asha, seeing that she was not hidden, came trembling. And falling down before him, she declared to him in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. And he said to her, 'Take courage, daughter, your belief has healed you. Go in peace.' While he was still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the congregation's house, saying to him, 'Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher any further.' And Yahushua, having heard, answered him, saying, 'Do not be afraid, only believe, and she shall be healed.' And coming into the house, he allowed no one to go in except for Kepha and Yakub and Yehuchanan and the girl's father and mother. And they were all weeping and mourning for her. And he said, 'Do not weep. She is not dead, but sleeps.'" Wow, there it is, man. Bold as bold can be, right? Smack in your face. "And they were laughing at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, Child, arise. And her ruach returned. See, her ruach went somewhere, returned. That there is interesting. And she rose up immediately, and he directed that she be given nourishment to eat. And her parents were astonished. So she had immortality. Would she have to have nourishment? Nah, she wasn't given immortality. She just woke up. But he ordered them to say to no one what had taken place. So here again, he woke her up and gave her to her parents, and she needed to eat, and she needed nutrition. So Yahuwah ordered them to give her food to eat. So there you go. Those are examples of being woke up from the dead without be given immortality. The only example we have of someone being woke up from the dead, arose from the dead and given immortality at this point is Yahusha. That's it, period. You see? So that's, to me, that's the truth, man. And Yahusha, upon his second coming, is going to raise the dead, and that's the first resurrection. Then, since it's a resurrection, they will be given immortality. All right? And they will not die ever again. It's just the second death has no power over them. So there was no resurrections before Yahusha, nor after Yahusha, until he comes back at his second coming. Then when he wakes them up or raises them from the dead, they will be resurrected because they will be given immortality, which is the proof that they have been resurrected. Okay? So there you go. That's it for this evening. And I hope that everyone has a better understanding now of first fruits, Bikurim, and its relationship to Shavuot or Pentecost, and how important it truly is, because it speaks of the resurrection. It's our expectation. It's our hope. It's what we're doing. It's why we're doing the things we're doing. Okay. And we've exposed the darkness, Hashatan's counterfeit, which is the Earth Mother, Mother Earth, Ishtar, Easter, all that represents the Satan's counterfeit scheme of Bikurim. So don't let him blind you with his lies and his darkness. Instead, expose the darkness. Okay, don't participate in the darkness, but expose it. Rather expose it. Okay, so there you go. I hope that if you want anything else to read on the resurrection, 2 Thessalonians is a recap where where Paul wrote about the resurrection in First Thessalonians, and they became deceived and confused by outside influences, and Paul got word of that and wrote them a second letter called 2 Thessalonians. In chapter 2, he explains it a lot better. Because the First Thessalonians were convinced by outside influences that they had missed the resurrection, and so they thought, well, if we've missed the resurrection, we might as well party, man, go wild, right? Eat and drink, for tomorrow we die, right? And Paul said, oh no, you didn't. No, not so fast. You've been lied to. And so he goes and explains the resurrection more precisely to them in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. So you may want to pick up your BYNV and read that. And a good thing to do on the Bikurim or first fruits the day after this weekly Sabbath, is you should read 1 Corinthians 15 again. Read it thoroughly. Leviticus 23 and 1 Corinthians 15, this coming Bikurim, would be a good thing to do. All right. So that's about it. I can't think of anything else. So I hope all of you got as much out of that as I did. And I'll be seeing a lot of you tomorrow. We're going to start in First Thessalonians, ironically. And maybe we can get through it. If not, we'll continue on in the following week then. But it's amazing. This has been an amazing week, and it continues to be amazing because everything's happening exactly like it did the week that Yahusha actually did get staked, died, buried, and resurrected. This is amazing stuff, man. It's nice that it's all coming like it really happened. So we've totally debunked the other part of Satan's lie or his counterfeit, if you will, when people teach that Yahusha had died on the sixth day, and then rose again on the first day. So that's out. We don't pay attention to that anymore. It all happened just like it's happening this week. Okay, he died on the fourth day. He remained in right at the evening, right at dusk. Okay, and then back in Egypt, when it became the fifth day, which would have been after it got dark, that's when they ate the Passover meal. And that's why we do the same thing if you participate in a Passover meal. 72 hours later would have been right to end the dusk of the weekly Shabbat, right as it was getting dark and became dark, right there. Within the minutes, Yahusha would have resurrected because it would have been precisely 72 hours. And it had to. He had to, because it was the sign of Jonah that he gave that generation. And he only gave him one sign. That was it, man. That's all he gave them. So it had to happen precisely. And then come about 9 o'clock in the morning. Well, before it got daylight, right at before dawn, when Mary met Yahusha and said, "Do not touch me because I have not ascended to my Father yet." And she took off to go give her the message he gave her to the brothers. That's when he ascended. Then he came back. But when he ascended, about 9 o'clock then, it became daylight. So we'll just say it became daylight around an imaginary zero there. And then it would be 6 a.m. And then up to 9 a.m., that's when the priest would wave the sheaf offering, the Omar, right, of barley. Okay, well, there's a little bit more to it than that, but we'll just leave it there. And at the same time, Yahusha was in the Shemayim, in the set apart place in the Shemayim, and he became the wave offering in front of the throne of Yahuwah and sprinkled the temple with his blood. Precisely, I think, at the same time, the priest down here in the Retz was doing the same thing in the temple. And then he came back and spent 40 days on the earth. before he went back into Shemayim and became the comforter. Powerful stuff, man. Powerful, powerful stuff. So he went back up after 40 days, and then he did what? He came back as the comforter on day 50 on Shavuot. Filled the 120 in the upper chamber. And 3,000 more were added to them that same day. Shavuot. Powerful stuff, man. So there you go. And see y'all in the morning or 12 o'clock p.m., noon, straight up noon, Eastern Standard Time on this same channel tomorrow. We'll get into it a little bit deeper as we begin to study 1 Thessalonians together. Ought to be a lot of fun. All right. I can't think of anything else. So I'm going to depart from you for a few hours, and I'll see y'all tomorrow. Oh, yeah. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for participating in the chat room. Thanks for studying with me. I appreciate all of you. Thank you all so much. Peace and love to everybody. And remember to stay in love with Yahusha. So long, Netzarim, beloved of Yahuah. So long, everybody. Thanks for coming.